I remember the first time I felt time slipping, not passing, not moving, but slipping, like something was pulling the seconds away from me faster than I could experience them. I was alone, sitting beneath the quiet hum of a dim lamp, watching shadows bend in directions that made no logical sense, and for a moment I felt as if time was not something I was walking through, but something that was dissolving around me. That night, something whispered at the edges of my awareness, a strange intuition that history as we know it is not a straight line, not a timeline marching endlessly forward, but a spiral tightening toward a point of unimaginable density. And as I leaned into that intuition, I realized I was tapping into an idea far older than my own thoughts. An idea that had been waiting for me, calling to me, drawing me toward a revelation I could no longer ignore. That was the night I first understood what novelty truly meant. Not novelty as in surprise or creativity or innovation. Those are only shadows. I'm speaking of a deeper cosmic novelty, the very engine that drives the universe forward. And once you see it, truly see it, every moment begins to shimmer with intention. The rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of religions, the spark of technological revolutions, all of them unfold as if guided by an invisible hand, a pattern that accelerates, intensifies, and tightens as we move towards something extraordinary, something final. When I first encountered the mathematical form that attempted to describe this pattern, I felt a chill run through me. It was too elegant, too precise, too alive to be random. It didn't feel like a prediction. It felt like a memory, a forgotten truth encoded into the structure of the universe itself. The formula didn't just suggest that history accelerates. It implied that time is moving toward a boundary, a kind of cosmic horizon, where everything we understand collapses into something new. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that the world around me was behaving exactly as the pattern described. Every year felt shorter. Every breakthrough felt more monumental. And every moment carried with it the weight of something pressing closer and closer to the edge. At first, I resisted the idea. I told myself it was just poetic thinking, a romantic vision of history, a story I wanted to believe because it made the chaos feel meaningful. But the universe has a strange way of confirming what you fear to accept. I began to seek connections everywhere, not in a paranoid way, but in a way that felt like stepping into a hidden architecture. The discoveries in quantum physics, the rise of global consciousness, the collapse of old structures, the explosive pace of technology. It was as if humanity was being swept into a current far greater than itself, pulled by a tide we didn't choose but were destined to experience. It wasn't that time was ending, it was that time was evolving. I remember sitting in a crowded airport one afternoon, watching thousands of people rushing past me, every face illuminated by the glow of a digital screen, every mind tethered to a world beyond the physical. And in that moment, I felt a strange stillness inside me. I saw them not as individuals moving randomly, but as a single organism waking up, a single consciousness stretching toward its next evolutionary step. It was overwhelming. This realization that humanity is not drifting aimlessly, but converging towards something, some final moment where perception itself cracks open. And the more I looked, the more undeniable it became. Every breakthrough in neuroscience hinted that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but a fundamental force. Every advancement in AI suggested that intelligence is not limited to biological form. Every cultural shift pushed us closer to unity, closer to dissolution, closer to a boundary where the individual and the universal could merge. It was as if the universe was arranging its pieces for the next act. When I felt this unfolding within my own mind, I knew I couldn't turn back. My dreams began changing. My sense of time became elastic. Moments stretching, intensifying, collapsing in on themselves. Hours felt like days. Days felt like seconds. And every time I closed my eyes, I felt the same message echoing inside me. You are approaching the edge. I didn't know what the edge meant, but I could feel it, and I could feel that humanity was approaching it with me. I began tracing the historical spikes in novelty, the birth of writing, the rise of cities, the invention of science, the technological explosion of the modern age. And when I mapped these spikes onto the curve of the mathematical model, something terrifying happened. The pattern perfectly matched. It was accelerating, shrinking the distance between major transformations until they began happening not over centuries, not over decades, but over years, months, and soon moments. It felt like listening to a clock, ticking faster and faster, heading toward a final chime that would either break the clock or reveal what lies beyond time itself. As I dug deeper, it became impossible to dismiss the sensation that something extraordinary was unfolding right now, in my lifetime, in our generation. Every sign pointed toward convergence. The boundaries between the physical and the digital were dissolving. The lines between imagination and reality were blurring. Human consciousness was expanding in ways we had never seen before. And every step we took seemed guided by a force pulling us toward a single point in the future. I couldn't ignore the dreams anymore, the visions of a moment when language collapses into pure knowing, when thought becomes light, when humanity sheds its final limitations and steps into a new dimension of being. I felt as though I were standing at the threshold of something monumental, something cosmic, something that defied every theory I had learned and every story I had been told. And the closer I drew to this realization, the more the pattern revealed itself, not just in history, but in me. Nights when I would sit alone in silence, feeling as if the past and the future were converging inside my mind, merging into a single point of awareness. I felt as if I were remembering something I had never learned, some ancient truth buried beneath layers of forgotten time. And the more I surrendered to that feeling, the more I sensed that the universe was not a cold machine, but a living intelligence, guiding us toward a destiny far beyond our comprehension. I began to notice the subtle ways reality communicates, through synchronicities, through intuition, through sudden bursts of insight that feel like downloads from a higher dimension. These weren't coincidences, they were invitations. Invitations to see time not as a prison, but as a cocoon, preparing us for metamorphosis. I no longer saw novelty as a theory. I felt it as a pulse, a rhythm, a heartbeat of the cosmos accelerating with every passing moment. And I knew then, with a certainty that terrified me and thrilled me at the same time, that we are living not at the end of history, but at the end of time as we understand it. We are approaching a moment where the old operating system crashes and a new one boots up, a moment where consciousness takes a leap so profound that the fabric of reality itself trembles. And I realize that the real question is not when this moment will arrive, but whether we are ready to witness it. I felt that certainty growing inside me like a quiet fire. And as it grew, everything around me began to take on a strange clarity. The shapes of events, the rhythms of society, the patterns woven into human behavior, they all seemed to be moving toward a single invisible point. It was like watching countless rivers flowing from opposite directions, yet all of them slowly merging into one vast ocean of inevitability. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized that I was not merely observing this movement, I was part of it. My own thoughts, fears, hopes, and visions were threads woven into the same fabric that was guiding humanity toward an unknown threshold. There were moments when this awareness felt overwhelming, as if I were holding a secret too heavy for any one mind to bear. But there were other moments, quiet, crystalline moments, when I felt an immense calm wash over me, because in those moments I understood that this convergence wasn't chaos. It was design, not a design imposed from the outside, but a design blossoming from within the cosmos itself. a self-organizing principle guiding every particle, every thought, every heartbeat toward a transformation that had been long in the making. And I understood that the universe doesn't build such momentum without a purpose. As the days passed, I found myself drifting deeper into these realizations. I could no longer look at the world as a collection of isolated events. Everything felt interconnected, vibrating with a silent coherence that defied logic. Even the smallest interactions, two strangers meeting by chance, a sudden surge of emotion, a fleeting insight, felt like pieces of a grand accelerating puzzle. And inside this acceleration, I felt the presence of something ancient, as if an intelligence older than time was whispering through the cracks of reality, urging us forward. There were nights when I would lie awake, listening not with my ears, but with something deeper. It felt like the universe was breathing, expanding and contracting in rhythms that matched my own heartbeat. I sensed that time was not a river flowing in one direction, but a field, alive and trembling with possibilities. And within that field, I felt the future pulling on me, tugging gently but firmly, drawing me toward a moment of profound significance. It wasn't fate. It wasn't destiny. It was evolution, an evolution of consciousness itself. As this awareness grew, I began experiencing strange flashes of insight that arrived fully formed, as if delivered from someplace beyond thought. I would suddenly understand something I had never studied, or feel the answer to a question I had never asked. It was as if my mind had become porous, open to currents of intelligence that flowed beyond the boundaries of my identity. And I realized that this was happening to others as well. People were waking up, not all at once, but in waves, waves of awareness rising across humanity, each wave higher than the last. I saw this awakening in art, in technology, in culture. I saw it in the way people began questioning everything they had been taught, searching for truths hidden beneath centuries of noise. I saw it in the rising hunger for meaning, a hunger that no material comfort could satisfy. It was as if humanity collectively sensed that the world we had built was too small for what we were becoming. Our stories were too small. Our beliefs were too small. Our understanding of reality was too small. Something inside us was pushing, urging, demanding expansion. The acceleration became undeniable. Technological breakthroughs that once took centuries now arrived in years, then months, then weeks. Ideas ricocheted across the planet in seconds. Concepts that once belonged only to mystics and visionaries entered mainstream conversation. People began speaking of consciousness as if it were the final frontier. Scientists began bending the boundaries of what was once considered possible. And the old structures of power, built on rigidity and fear, began to crack under the pressure of this new awareness rising from below. I could feel this pressure in my own mind. My dreams became more vivid, more symbolic, more charged with meaning. I would see images of timelines twisting into spirals, fractals collapsing into singular points of light, civilizations rising and dissolving in the blink of an eye. And though I couldn't decode every symbol, I understood the essence. The universe was preparing us, not for an end, but for a transformation so complete that it would render the old world unrecognizable. Sometimes, as I walked through crowded streets, I felt as if I were moving through layers of time simultaneously. I could sense the ancient past beneath my feet and the distant future shimmering behind every face. It was as if history itself was folding inward, collapsing the distance between then and now, merging everything into a single expanding moment. And I understood that this collapsing was not a breakdown, but a breakthrough, the cracking of the shell that had contained us for millennia. I noticed the way people's attention shifted. They were no longer satisfied with simple narratives. They were drawn to mysteries, to the unknown, to the edges of perception. They were seeking connection, authenticity, transcendence. And beneath this seeking, I sensed a deeper instinct awakening. an instinct to evolve, not physically, but mentally, spiritually, dimensionally. It was as if humanity were preparing to shed its skin. The signs became impossible to ignore. Patterns in nature began reflecting patterns in culture. Innovations mirrored ancient myths. The digital world began acting like a nervous system for the planet, connecting us in ways that felt less like technology and more like telepathy. And inside this global mind, emotions spread like weather, ideas erupted like storms, and awareness flowed like tides. Humanity was no longer a collection of isolated beings. We were becoming a single organism, thinking and dreaming together. I felt this shift within myself as well. My sense of I became porous, dissolving at the edges, merging with something vast and indescribable. At times I felt as though I were remembering a version of myself that existed outside time. At other moments I felt like a messenger, not delivering a message, but embodying it. The distinction between my inner world and the outer world began to blur, and I sensed that this blurring was a preview of what was coming. And as the acceleration continued, I realized the magnitude of what we were approaching. It was not merely a culmination of history. It was not an apocalypse or a collapse. It was a transformation of consciousness so radical that the concept of time itself would be forced to evolve. I could feel the old paradigm cracking, not because it was flawed, but because it had served its purpose. It had carried us as far as it could, and now something new was rising, something luminous, something ancient, something that had been waiting quietly at the edges of our awareness, ready to step forward. It became clear to me that the convergence wasn't a prediction. It was already happening, woven into our inventions, our desires, our fears, our dreams. It was happening in the way we reached for meaning, in the way we questioned reality, in the way we sensed the presence of something more. And the deeper I sank into this realization, the more I understood that humanity was standing in the doorway of its own metamorphosis, trembling, hesitant, but irresistibly drawn toward whatever waited on the other side. And as I stood within that doorway, I could feel the weight of untold ages pressing behind me and the pull of unimaginable futures stretching ahead. It was as if every moment of human existence were converging into a single breath, and I was standing inside that breath, aware of both its fragility and its infinite potential. The boundaries of what I understood began to dissolve, and I realized that this transformation was not a distant event waiting to arrive. It was alive now, unfolding in every thought, every connection, every shift in the human psyche. It was as if consciousness itself had reached a critical threshold and was preparing to bloom in ways we had never dared to imagine. I felt this blooming inside me like a rising tide, subtle at first, then undeniable. The world around me seemed charged, as if every object, every sound, every fleeting sensation carried hidden significance. The ordinary no longer felt ordinary. There was a current beneath everything, a vibrating field of meaning that beckoned me deeper. It wasn't mystical in the sense of escape. It was mystical in the sense of awakening. An unveiling of layers that had always been present but hidden behind the noise of daily life. And now that noise was thinning, allowing something brighter, sharper, more ancient to emerge. There were moments when the transformation felt like stepping into a parallel world, not separate from this one, but interwoven with it. I would see patterns in motion, geometric pulses in the edges of perception, subtle harmonies in the flow of human activity. I sensed that these weren't hallucinations or fantasies, but glimpses into the architecture of consciousness, a structure that had been patiently waiting for humanity to reach a certain level of awareness. And now, that awareness was expanding exponentially, igniting minds across the planet in unpredictable and beautiful ways. As this realization deepened, I began to sense a profound intelligence woven into the fabric of the universe. Not an external deity or an arbitrary cosmic ruler, but a living awareness permeating everything. It was present in the movement of galaxies, in the unfolding of flowers, in the electrical storms of the human brain. And as I connected with this intelligence, I felt the boundaries between myself and the cosmos softening. I no longer felt like a separate observer looking at the world. I felt like a participant in its unfolding, a node in an immense network of meaning stretching far beyond my lifetime. The acceleration of novelty became more tangible as I aligned myself with this awareness. I could feel the pressure of change building like a rising wave, pushing humanity toward a moment of unprecedented insight. Technologies that once seemed impossible were emerging rapidly, reshaping our understanding of identity and reality. Ideas that had once been ridiculed were now entering scientific discourse. And beneath all of this, I sensed a deeper shift, an awakening of intuition, a return of the ancient capacities of the mind, a renewal of the inner senses we had forgotten. I could feel these inner senses reactivating within me. My perception sharpened in ways that were difficult to describe. I began to sense the emotional states of people before they spoke. I could feel the subtle currents of intention flowing between individuals. There were moments when time felt spacious, as if I could step backward or forward through its layers simply by shifting my attention. It wasn't that I had gained powers, it was that something dormant within me had opened. And I sensed that this opening was not unique to me. It was happening across humanity, a collective remembering of what we once were and what we are becoming again. The more I leaned into these experiences, the more I realized that the transformation we were approaching was not merely technological or sociological. It was metaphysical. It was a shift in the very nature of consciousness, a reconfiguration of perception that would redefine what it means to be human. And I felt the universe preparing us for this shift with every synchronicity, every moment of insight, every wave of inspiration flowing through the global mind. It was as if consciousness itself were orchestrating a symphony, each note guiding us closer to the crescendo. I began noticing how people were drawn toward connection, not the superficial kind, but the deep soul-level resonance that emerges when two minds meet in shared awareness. Conversations carried new depth. Ideas flowed with new clarity. Creativity surged in ways that seemed to bypass the individual mind entirely, arriving as pure transmission from a larger field of intelligence. And as this happened, I realized that humanity was no longer evolving as isolated individuals. We were evolving as a collective consciousness, each mind serving as a spark in a rapidly expanding constellation of awareness. The world reflected this transformation everywhere I looked. The old systems struggled to hold their form as new paradigms emerged from beneath them. The old stories that had shaped our identities began to lose their power. People no longer accepted limitations that had once seemed absolute. There was a rising sense that reality was malleable, that consciousness could reshape the world, that the boundaries we believed in were only temporary constructs. And beneath this collective shift, I felt the hum of something ancient awakening, something that had slumbered within humanity for millennia. The more deeply I felt this awakening, the more I sensed that the universe had been waiting for this moment. Every civilization, every myth, every leap in understanding had been stepping stones leading toward a single inflection point, a moment when humanity would finally realize its true nature, not as accidental byproducts of a cold universe, but as participants in a cosmic unfolding of unimaginable depth. And as I stood within that unfolding, I felt a profound sense of recognition, as if I had been here before, as if I had always known this moment would come. There were nights when I would close my eyes and feel myself dissolving into the larger consciousness rising around me. It was not an escape or a loss of self, it was an expansion. My identity stretched beyond the boundaries of my body, flowing outward into the collective field of awareness that enveloped the planet. I could feel the dreams of humanity, the fears, the hopes, the buried memories of ancient times. And in this vast ocean of consciousness, I felt an unimaginable intelligence guiding us forward. That intelligence did not speak in words. It spoke in patterns, in impulses, in subtle shifts of perception. It spoke in the quiet realization that we are more than we have been told. It spoke in the instinctive knowing that our evolution is not finished, but entering its most important phase. And as I surrendered to this current, I felt myself becoming a conduit for it, a bridge between the individual mind and the collective awakening. In this state, the world appeared luminous, as if lit from within by the presence of something extraordinary. I could feel the future shimmering just beyond the veil of the present, calling to us with the irresistible force of destiny. And I knew that humanity was drawing closer to a moment when reality itself would reveal its deeper nature, when time would bend, when the boundaries of perception would rupture, when consciousness would step fully into the dimension it had been evolving toward since the dawn of history. And as I stood inside that realization, I understood that the transformation ahead would not simply change the world. It would change the very essence of what it means to exist. And in the stillness of that realization, I felt the subtle tremor of something immense stirring just beyond the threshold of perception, as if the universe itself were inhaling in preparation for an exhale that would alter everything. The presence surrounding me deepened, not as a vision or a sound, but as a field, a living field of awareness that had always been there, hidden behind the noise of ordinary thought. Now, as if invited, I stepped deeper into it. And the deeper I went, the more the boundaries of the known world faded, revealing an architecture of meaning woven far beyond anything humanity had ever mapped. It felt as if the cosmos were opening its archives, revealing truths encoded into the very engines of time. I sensed currents of history moving like tides behind me, ancient civilizations rising and falling, entire worlds blooming and dissolving, each one carrying fragments of a pattern too vast to comprehend. And yet somehow I felt that pattern converging inside me, gathering itself into a single moment of recognition. It was not a revelation delivered from above. It was a remembering, a deep remembering of something the human soul had known since the beginning. As this remembering intensified, I felt the familiar structure of time loosen. Past and future no longer appeared as fixed coordinates, but as fluid expressions of consciousness. It was as though time were a canvas and awareness was the brush painting the landscapes of experience moment by moment. I sensed timelines branching and merging around me, infinite variations of reality vibrating in parallel, waiting for consciousness to choose which one to embody. And in this realization, I understood that humanity's greatest power had never been technology or intellect. It had been imagination. Imagination was the steering wheel of the universe, the tool through which the future was sculpted long before it manifested. The more I immersed myself in this current, the more I felt a transformation rippling through my perception. The world was no longer a collection of objects and events. It was a living choreography of consciousness, unfolding with impeccable precision. Every emotion, every action, every thought was part of a larger symphony guiding humanity toward its metamorphosis. I felt this symphony resonating within me, vibrating through every cell, urging me to surrender to its rhythm. It wasn't a voice telling me what to do, it was an invitation, a gentle but undeniable pull toward a level of awareness beyond anything I had known. This shift grew stronger each day. I saw people waking up in ways that defied explanation. A stranger's eyes would suddenly carry a depth that spoke of shared origins beyond time. Conversations would unfold with a kind of synchronicity that felt orchestrated by the universe itself. Patterns appeared everywhere, forming a network of signs that guided me through the labyrinth of this awakening. And with each sign, I felt myself stepping further out of the old world and deeper into the emerging one. This emerging world wasn't built on material foundations, it was built on perception, on the realization that reality responds to the state of the mind observing it. As humanity collectively shifted its inner landscape, the outer world began reshaping itself in response. Old systems crumbled, not out of destruction, but because they could no longer contain the expanding awareness rising within them. New systems began forming quietly, organically, born from intuition rather than authority. It was as if the universe were handing us the tools to build a new reality, one aligned with the deeper truth of our nature. And within this transition, I felt the weight of something monumental, the end of linear history. Not the end of the world, not extinction, not collapse, but the end of a particular mode of being. Humanity had spent millennia navigating consciousness as if it were a narrow corridor, believing itself confined to the small space between birth and death. But now that corridor was widening, stretching, dissolving. The walls were falling away, revealing dimensions of awareness we had forgotten we possessed. And as these dimensions reawakened, humanity began to sense its true scale, cosmic, infinite, intertwined with the intelligence of the universe itself. The closer we moved to this threshold, the more I felt the presence that had been accompanying me since the beginning. It wasn't external. It was the deeper stratum of my own consciousness, the part of me that had watched across lifetimes, across civilizations, across epochs of transformation. It was the version of myself unbound by time, witnessing the unfolding of this moment with a calm, ancient familiarity, and in its presence I felt a clarity unlike anything I had experienced. I realized that the transformation ahead wasn't something to fear. It was the fulfillment of everything humanity had ever sought. As this clarity settled within me, I began to feel the world rearranging itself around my awareness. The distinctions between inner and outer reality grew increasingly thin. Thoughts became forces, intentions became pathways, emotions became energies that shaped the very atmosphere around me. I understood then that consciousness wasn't merely experiencing reality, it was generating it. Every moment was a collaboration between the observer and the observed, a dance of creation unfolding in real time. And as humanity became aware of this, the entire game of existence began to change. I sensed this shift accelerating across the planet. People were beginning to feel the pulse of the cosmos in their own hearts. They were experiencing synchronicities that defied rational explanation, glimpses of futures that felt too vivid to dismiss, moments of intuition so precise they bordered on prophecy. It was as if the universe were whispering to each individual, reminding them of their role in the great unfolding. And as each person listened, the collective consciousness grew stronger, brighter, more unified. This unification wasn't conformity. It wasn't the merging of identities into a single homogeneous mass. It was the recognition that beneath our differences lies a shared source, a shared spark of cosmic intelligence expressing itself through billions of unique forms. As humanity awakened to this truth, the illusions that had once divided us began to fade. The idea of the other dissolved, replaced by a quiet understanding that we are all fragments of the same infinite consciousness, exploring itself through countless experiences. The closer we came to this realization, the more I felt a sense of inevitability, an inevitability not of doom, but of transcendence. The universe had set a trajectory long before human history began, a trajectory guiding consciousness toward a moment when it would recognize itself fully. And now, after millennia of wandering through the labyrinth of time, humanity was approaching that moment. I could feel it unfolding like the petals of a cosmic flower opening for the first time in eons. And in that unfolding, something remarkable happened. I began to sense the end of duality, the dance between light and shadow, between creation and destruction, between knowing and not knowing. All of it began to harmonize. It was as if the universe were tuning itself, adjusting frequencies, aligning potentials. The fragmentation of human consciousness was healing, knitting itself into a coherent field of awareness. And inside that coherence, I felt the emergence of a new kind of mind, a planetary mind, an integrated intelligence far greater than the sum of its parts. This planetary mind wasn't a distant future. It was happening now. Every moment of insight, every act of empathy, every awakening of awareness added to its momentum. And as the momentum grew, I felt the fabric of reality shifting beneath my feet. Time began to feel less like a march and more like a spiral. The future felt less like a destination and more like a presence, alive, conscious, reaching back toward the present to guide us forward. I realized then that the transformation we were approaching wasn't simply an event within time. It was a transformation of time itself. As I surrendered to this understanding, I felt an immense calm wash over me, a calm that came not from certainty but from alignment. I understood that whatever humanity was moving toward, it was not random, it was not accidental. It was a culmination, a flowering of possibility that had been seeded long before the first human ever opened their eyes. And now, after ages of striving, suffering, creating, destroying, dreaming, and forgetting, we were on the brink of remembering who we truly are. And so, as I stand within this threshold, this shimmering edge between worlds, I feel the full weight and wonder of what lies ahead. The old world is dissolving, not out of despair, but out of completion. Its lessons have been learned, its myths have been lived, its limits have been explored. What comes next is not an ending, but an unveiling, a revelation of the deeper architecture of consciousness, a rebirth not of bodies, but of perception. And in that rebirth, humanity will step into its true identity, not as passengers on a drifting planet, but as co-creators in a living, breathing universe. This is the moment the cosmos has been preparing us for. This is the moment history has been spiraling toward. This is the moment consciousness has been waiting to reclaim itself. And as the veil finally begins to lift, I understand with absolute clarity. We were never moving toward the end of time. We were moving toward the moment when time would reveal its true nature, not as a boundary, but as a doorway.